All right, so we will be talking about some solar and storage projects, some of the challenges around those projects, how to value some of those projects as well. So with me today to do that is Bill Hetherington, CEO of Bandera Electric Cooperative.
Yep.
We have Dan Seif with 7X Energy. Over here we have Dr. Calvin Zhang, sorry about that, with ComEd. And over on the end we have Julio Romero Aguero with Quanta technology. I'll let these folks go ahead and give a better introduction of themselves. So Bill, please go ahead.
I'm with Bandera Electric Cooperative, and for those in the room, I'm sure I see some co-op folks here. We're northwest of San Antonio, about 45 miles, just to give you a kind of a landmark. I came to Bandera in 2013, and the first thing I did when I got there, we were selling surge protectors and water heaters, and nobody was buying. And I said, so well, why don't we ask our members, why don't we ask our customers what they want? Revolutionary idea. So we did a survey, we asked them, the answer came back, we want high-speed internet and we want solar and energy storage. And that kind of blew us away, because I think what most electric utilities don't understand is there is a certain aspect, there are certain groups out there that want it, and as a member-based organization, we felt empowered to provide our customers, our members, what it is they want. We want to be their energy advisor. So in 2014, we started developing solar solutions for residential and commercial for our customers. And we started an established relationship with Tesla in 2015. Today, we're the second largest reseller of Tesla Powerwalls in the state of Texas. And one of the other things that we found was that there really wasn't a good solution for monitoring both generation gross net as well as loads behind the meter. So in 2016, we started working on ApolloWare, which is our cloud-based software solution for demand response and for the demand energy management system. So today we have about 37,000 electric customers. We have about 3,800 internet customers, 500 phone customers, and 250 solar customers. I guess we feel like the business model is changing, and what I'm here to talk about is our interpretation of how electric utilities' business model needs to shift to accommodate the changing needs of our members. So I'll shut up now.
Thank you, Bill, and I know we'll talk about ApolloWare a little bit later in the panel. Dan?
Yeah, so I'm the Vice President of Market Development at 7X Energy. We are a solar development company based out of Austin, Texas. I'm kind of the newbie to the team. I've been brought on, about 3 months ago now, to help move 7X Energy into newer technology permutations, including solar and storage, as well as new transactional platforms. We are traditionally, which is a strange word to use since we've only been around for 3.5 years, but a large utility scale, project out in the desert tied to the wholesale grid development company. We've had over 725 megawatts AC in 4 different projects financed. 2 are operational at about 400 megawatts, and we have another 500 megawatts that had announced PPAs. So we're quite adept at the large scale stuff, but the market is ever evolving, and now we're moving with both feet into what's next.
My name is Calvin Zhang. I'm Senior Manager of Smart Grid and Technology, Commonwealth, Edison. So our company is the largest utility company in Northern Illinois. We serve about 4 million customers. We're based in Chicago, including the Chicago metropolitan area. So my team lead the efforts of evaluating different emerging technologies and develop and manage pilot projects, generate learnings, and give the recommendations to the, I would say, next generation of the modern grid. So today I'm going to talk about several projects, including the microgrid, solar storage, what we're doing in Northern Illinois.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Julio Romero Aguero. I'm Vice President of Strategy and Business Innovation at Quanta Technology. Quanta Technology is a consultancy and advisory services provider for the utility industry. We are also a solution developer. Quanta Technology is part of Quanta Services. This is a wholly owned subsidiary but independent arm of Quanta Services, which is the largest specialized services provider for the utility industry in North America. My office is in Houston, Texas. I have been in this industry for 24 years. Before being a In this role, I have been a utility engineer, a utility executive, a university professor, and also a regulator. So I have done a little bit of everything. My role at Quanta is to lead our grid modernization and technology strategy services and explore new business opportunities, especially with electric utilities. I also provide leadership in services related to distribution systems, especially with integration of distributed energy resources and emerging technologies. One of our areas of expertise at Quanta is the development of new methodologies for modernization of the grid and integration of distributed energy resources. Just to give you an idea, about 12 years ago, we pioneered some of the initial methodologies for estimating hosting capacity impacts of solar photovoltaic in distribution systems and also electric vehicle integration. So that 12 years ago when this was completely a new topic. Lately, some of the efforts, some of the areas that we have been working on are related with non-wire alternatives, value of DER, and value of the grid, which is something that many times is ignored when we do this type of analysis. So again, it's a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you all. So Dan and Julio, I'll start with y'all, and Calvin, maybe you can provide some perspective on this as well. Can you talk about some of the barriers for storage in energy markets today?
Yeah, sure. I'll take a stab. So our greatest familiarity is with Texas, particularly ERCOT, though we definitely have vision on other markets. In fact, have an operating project in Virginia now. But I think behind the meter, the challenge is pricing structures. All small commercial and residential throughout the state is a volumetric rate, which means just per kilowatt hour. But that's not actually, if you go to higher levels of where the tariffs are, that your utility faces, how those are structured is really a three-part structure, really everywhere in the United States, because it reflects how the costs are really occurred, which is a coincident peak structure for transmission against the system-wide, the grid peak. And then there's a non-coincident peak for your demand charges for your distribution wires, which is basically what is your peak of your load, what is your forcing function on distribution lines, and then there's the wholesale energy portion. But you don't see any of those details on your retail bill as a homeowner or renter or what have you. You just see per kilowatt hour. And there is substantial restriction from releasing, particularly in ERCOT, the way the transmission pricing structure works. It's only based on one synthetic hour, 4 15-minute periods in each one of the summer months. Mm-hmm. The other 8,759 hours of power use at any facility has no relevance to the transmission charge structure. Okay, so industrial entities, they could actually just power down for that one synthetic hour and have no transmission charges for the year. And some do that pretty successfully. But you as a homeowner cannot do that because your rate is spread out over kilowatt hours for the whole year. So if you had that price structure available to you, maybe on an optional basis, and it's happened before, I know Sherryland had an option down in, I think, in the Rio Grande area to have those structures. You could respond with storage against those demand charges, but currently it's not possible unless you're on Bill's opt-in program, right, where he'll credit you those demand charge values. And but it's rare, and that's one of the reasons why Bill's a leader.
Well, my opinion is I think that there is still a challenge regarding technology maturity, especially, I would say, battery energy storage systems. Although they have been around for a good amount of time, there is this perception in the industry that the technology is still not fully mature, and this perception about risks as well. And we had recent events, right, that I don't think that have helped eliminate that perception or improve that perception. So that's one of the challenges. The other one is, I think, local regulations. And let me give you an example. You were talking about behind the meter. So fire regulations, right, in several cities in the U.S. Prevent the deployment of behind the meter battery storage systems. And I agree with you about the cost structure and being able to do an analysis to recover investments. There are no clear rules in some markets to do that. At the same time, I think that there is a challenge, still a challenge in terms of developing tools or solutions to estimate some of these benefits and costs of energy storage and compare them versus traditional solutions. I think that in the tools that I have seen in the industry sometimes make too many assumptions. And I have seen tools that, for instance, are basically Excel spreadsheets, right? And when you do this type of analysis, these are very complex analysis, and you need to consider the grid when you do those analysis. You need to consider what I call time series simulations, 87, 60 hours of the year. You need to consider grid constraints. You have to run power flows. You need to consider also control models of battery energy storage systems. So in the analysis that we do, we consider all of those aspects. And, but I don't think that there is I would say, a standardized approach or methodology that is accepted by the industry that we can use to compare basically apples to apples.
Yeah, maybe I can chime in from the utility perspective. First, I think is the technology itself and the cost. I think it's still like, it's not like really as expected, it's dropped a lot, but it's still comparing to, it's not relatively really low right now. The second piece is how to evaluate this battery can provide it to the grid, like Julio said. So basically they're different. They have to realize different categories of values of these DERs. I would say more general, the DER can provide the transmission side, for example, and also the wholesale market side. They have different market to evaluate that. And a lot of challenges you have to consider is also the distribution side, how to evaluate that DER to help to provide the value to the distribution grid. There's no standard method, and for example, we have developed with our partners a method like Julio said. You have to realize for the distribution side, comparing to the traditional upgrade, how this value can be realized by for example, storage as part of DER. You have to consider its time basis, because it's not like across the time the energy storage is needed or provided. That it's certain times like peak or certain different ways, and also to provide how they can provide it. It's what they can provide it, how they can provide, and where they can provide, because location matters as well. It's different locations and your different feeders gonna be different, and also like what kind of support or values provide. Is it real power or reactive power or reserve? All this need to be considered and provide a very detailed analysis based on the historical time series analysis. And this is the methodology and framework itself. This is why we internally and with partners we developed certain method doing that. The second piece is to implement that into the resource planning process, right? You need a tool. You need a tool to incorporate all this methodology into your planning process. And then to consider that, comparing to traditionally like this line and post upgrade. Then afterwards, you need a certain policy and incentives for realizing it. So I see that is a major challenge on that as well.
Yeah, just one last thing is on a wholesale level, which I didn't address, the big thing probably everybody here is aware of who follows, Public Utility Commission actions in Texas is you can't really own storage as a wires utility as part of your congestion reliability management solutions as a substitute to transmission. And there's a docket that's been before the PUC for, I don't know, year and a half, 48023. They were waiting for the Texas legislature to give them some kind of sign of what exactly they should do, and it didn't really come. They didn't get a no, or they didn't get a yes. So that will probably pick up some momentum here. I think something positive will come out, but how big, how soon, I wouldn't hold my breath too much there. But
Bill, I saw that reaction just now to what Dan said. Do you have any further thoughts?
Yeah, I think that, unfortunately, you have a legislative piece and a regulatory piece, and then you have a technology piece. And I think that what we're trying to do at Bandera Electric Co-op is we're meeting the needs of our members. And I say this to utilities. There's probably 1% of your utility. It doesn't matter where you are in the United States. It doesn't matter what your political viewpoints are. There's probably at least 1% of your member base that's interested in solar and storage, and they have the resources to pay for it, and they want the utility to provide it. And that provides us a good training field to start these analyses. You know, we've been doing it for 3 years now, and we've learned some very interesting things about how solar systems are designed. We've run into cases where the inverters aren't sized correctly and it clips the waveform. We've evaluated where inverters will actually start failing. We've also found other instances where we can really capture the value of that capacity charge in a real-time environment. So we're still at the beginning stages, but I think the good news is that there are folks out there who are willing to fund it, and those are our members and our customers, and it's just tapping in and allowing them to participate. So it's been successful for us. I mean, as far as the regulatory stuff, that's always problematic. You know, when a bill gets passed, there's always going to be interpretations and filed, and then it's something that you shouldn't hang your hat on, and it's frustrating. So we've taken a very much a grassroots member approach, and it seems to have worked for us. So.
And something else, I think that within the technology community and the engineering community, power engineering community, there is consensus that energy storage is not a load and it's not a generation. But when you talk to regulators, they don't see it that way. Generally, it's considered generation, right? And that prevents some utilities to own it or to deploy it, right? Because they are not allowed to own generation, especially wires companies, right? So I agree with you that the regulatory side is complex. And returning to the technology side, I think that as an industry, I mean, there is a recognition that we need energy storage to operate the grid of the future. So, but at the same time, we need to recognize that there is plenty of work to do. I mean, the technology needs to improve, and in prices, I mean, costs they need to go down as well.
Well, can I stir things up a little bit on that one?
Go for it.
I think for a lot of applications, costs do need to come down. And I'm looking at some opportunities where I think we're there, but might not have been there 2 years ago or say. But there's others that are just screaming low-hanging fruit that never get done. Mm-hmm. One example is AP, through a joint venture, did this Presidio project, 6-hour battery, sodium, sulfur, over $1,000 per kilowatt hour. You could do that project now, 1/3 or 1/4 of that cost. That was done 9 years ago to microgrid that remote community in times of transmission. Okay, and that was a one-off, no precedent-based decision by the PUC. AP had said, I've had an AP lead for the distribution systems on a panel with me within like a year ago, and they said, we could easily deploy hundreds of millions of dollars today at our most expensive to maintain long-distance distribution lines in our rural territories. Well, they're not a co-op. They're investor-owned, so they don't even have that much rural territory. So, I think, Bill, I think co-ops, they need a lot of help, I think, in terms of assessing this opportunity, because you do have a little bit more freedom of action. But I think there's going to be the lowest 1%, 2%, 3%, 4% hanging fruit, which is the most expensive distribution line. Maybe you have a 15-mile line with a cluster of 10 properties at the end that's causing you, 5% of your distribution costs, but it's 0.2% of your population. And exactly how to microgrid that, I mean, most of these co-ops don't have a huge staff to be able to analyze that opportunity and go after it. The economics are there, but the ability to execute is very challenging. And then the regulatory dynamic, I mean, if AP is saying they're ready to deploy hundreds of millions of dollars instead of deploying billions on transmission, and the PUC says, well, we need to think about this further. Like, that was 9 years ago, and that was a good deal. What does it cost now? I mean, literally billions of dollars are not being spent, and instead, 3s and 4s and billions of dollars are being done transmission. And in case we think we can wait for this forever, nationally, transmission is up like 6.5%, 7% per year for over a decade. Right? We've gone from $1 billion a year spend on the rate case in ERCOT in 2006 to $4 billion a year, which will be after this year. Okay, $3 billion increase. Everybody says CREZ. CREZ is 40% of that story. You remove CREZ from the story, you still have a 5.5% escalation rate, which is 2.5 times inflation. You can't wait forever to adopt to the future. And we love transmission in solar. If it's like CREZ, and it's $7 billion of transmission to save the ratepayers $15 billion, those should happen all day long. And we even find if it's mixed with other technologies, maybe not just transmission. And actually, that wasn't just transmission. That had capacitor banks, which aren't being used for other reasons. But the money is just waiting to be spent and saved, and it's not a technology issue. It's a regulatory issue.
And Bill, Dan's talking about transmission. How influential are transmission costs when you guys are developing solar and storage, or maybe even other DER projects?
Well, I mean, it is a contributing factor. Our transmission rates have gone up 100% since 2010, which is pretty ridiculous. But that is the nature and the structure of the way here in ERCOT the transmission costs are socialized. I know it's a bad word in Texas, but they are, and uplifted across the whole state. So, you know, you know, I think the intent originally was for the CREZ to basically provide easy access for renewable out in West Texas to get to the urban areas, but it's kind of gotten out of control. And so, you know, we believe, and I firmly believe that distribution is really where the solution's going to be. And we've got to take that seriously, because nobody can afford transmission solution to this. And at some point, somebody's going to wake up and say, "Wow, that $8 billion. What are we paying $8 billion for?"
Well,
and that's
I know I'm talking both sides here, but it's a $1 billion a year in the rate case. It was $7.5 billion, right, for overall capital spend. Mm-hmm. So if you divide that by the total kilowatt hours, it's basically like $3 a megawatt hour, $2.5 a megawatt hour. Is like 10 gigawatts of new wind bidding at negative 30,
right,
saving us 3?
No.
I think it's saving us more like 8 or 9. We're crushing it on that decision. Yeah. So there are some decisions that you can't just say transmission is bad. Transmission, it's not transmission, it's transmission system upgrades. And what are the best technologies to do it? In solar, we are all for transmission system upgrades because there's great resources that are underserved that we could bring in like a CREZ type structure, but it doesn't have to all be wires, poles, transformers, and switches. Storage could be an important solution and reduce the cost for everybody.
Yes, I think that this is, this is a very good discussion. I think that there are two extreme views, right? And one view is, the future is going to be just a collection of microgrids, and distributed resources is going to solve everything. That's one view. Then the other one is, a very conservative view is, we don't need distributed resources. We are just going to continue building wires, installing wires everywhere. I think that the truth is somewhere in between. I think that we are still going to need transmission, distribution, and we are going to need distributed resources as well. Each one of them have their applications, right? I think that and that's why when I mentioned the evaluation of the value of DER and the value of the grid, I think that we need to make a comparison using all the potential benefits and at the same time all of the potential costs. In some of these evaluations, we tend to ignore, I would say, the costs associated with DER. And I think that they need to be accounted for. And when I mentioned technology, I was referring to, for instance, to technology obsolescence, right? We are comparing assets like a transmission line that has a lifetime of 40 years easily versus an asset that very likely is going to be obsolete, I don't know, in 10 or 20 years. And prices are going to be different also in 10, 20 years. So utilities need to take that into account when they make a decision. But I'm not saying this, I'm not advocating for, okay, let's not use storage anymore. I think that it has a role, and there are some applications. You mentioned some of those, and those are kind of the classic applications, long transmission lines, and you need to ensure reliability at the end of that transmission line. You have a community, or you may not have enough capacity, so you need to deploy distributed resources at the end of that line. That's the Borrego Springs model, right? The San Diego Gas and Electric. That's the classic example. But there are other applications too. And I'm a big advocate. I like the idea of distributed energy storage, distributed solar, but there are still technology challenges from the point of view of control. How are we going to control, let's see, thousands of distributed batteries, distributed solar? How are we going to coordinate it?
That is going to be an issue when you're Hawaii. I don't know how many decades we are away from being Hawaii.
Well,
I mean,
when we hit the
look,
prices,
you don't have any
we will.
vision in the regulated areas, the munis and co-ops of 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 megawatt facilities. They can turn on 5 megawatt pumps in a second. You have no visibility at ERCOT of any of that. And then to think that we have to get into that for a 2 megawatt battery, I mean, the playing field is so uneven, it's not even funny. So while you guys are right for the big stuff, I think this like endless analysis paralysis is really the problem at the distributed energy. No, it's not the most complicated thing ever. It's a thing that sucks energy and spits it, and you have it in your phone. Yes, you should be using R scripts and not putting it in Excel, but we have to use, the technology is there. It's being implemented already at 1 gigawatt per year. I mean,
I'm glad that you mentioned Hawaii. I'm glad that you mentioned Hawaii because the way I see Hawaii is a sneak peek into the future. When the price is right, that's what is going to happen. So we need to prepare for that, I think.
And
Okay.
maybe I can chime in as a utility perspective. So one thing I would like to present is one part to make the energy storage DER to the value is working together with the grid together. Because the benefits is for customers to get this. So how for the customer to get this is the grid. So I agree, definitely, DER, like energy storage, should be part of one of the solutions for getting more and more solar. So I would say solar is actually bring a lot of challenges and also bring a lot of opportunity for energy storage. But how to realize that value, like I said before, the value is from providing, absorbing different time frame of the power, including active power or reactive power or reserve. How to do that is because you need a grid and to analyze when and where you need it. Because if you put a different energy storage to a different location, some location, I would say if you're operating a different way, it may cause even more problem. Think about it, right? It can be a worse loading to need more upgrade of the grid. So what I'm bringing to that is you need a grid and you need to monitoring, control, operation capability to realize this value, how this DER energy storage can provide to the grid. So it's not like you put all the solar and energy storage into the grid, it's gonna work. It's gonna work harmonically. The answer is no. First, to mitigate the local problem, you need a local control. That's why smart inverter business are now adding on, and now the people working on 15.4/7. And we had a IEEE, the white paper mentioned about how the smart inverter function can help to realize the value and why it's important. Second is you talk about a lot of like monitoring control capability, which is you need that to realize the value because you need to know when to charge, when to discharge, and to realize the value. For example, one of the use cases is mitigate the solar intermittency. You need a forecast value to know when this intermittency is gonna come and when you need the storage to mitigate this problem, right?
Yes.
The second is you have to real-time sending, receiving the condition and send the dispatch point, which is the control pieces we just mentioned. You need a system to do the real-time. And of course, you need the real-time high reliability communication infrastructure. Then you can take all the snapshot of the real-time condition and send your control appointment to the battery to say, hey, I need this much of your power to send by this way or charge by this hours, right? So all this, you need a grid and you need operation of this and you need this to work harmonically, to embrace more solar and utilize more efficiently of the grid, the DER to realize the value.
Right. I'd like to chime in on that, Calvin. I think you're right. In fact, that's why we really developed ApolloWare, was because we saw that there was a lack of visibility that the utilities have and what's going on, but not only at the home, but behind the meter. Yeah. And so, since there was really kind of this void and vacuum, we just started looking at what we could do. It's going to have to be an evolution. We can't sit back and just wait till somebody smart figures it out 20 years from now. We've got to learn, and by doing that, you're deploying it in small places and you're learning lots. As I mentioned earlier, we've learned now how to analyze the problems with solar and inverters in near real time. That's a very valuable lesson to learn. And so there are certain places and certain applications on the distribution systems that it does work for load balancing, for voltage control. Let's take the low-hanging fruit first. We know that it's going to take probably decades before it's really fully integrated, but now's the time to start. So I agree, but I think we need to be more progressive in that move.
Yeah. Maybe just keep on this conversation is I totally agree. Maybe I can introduce some of the project we are doing in this area is the Pioneer. So one of our, maybe you heard of Brownsville Community Microgrid, which is like in the South Chicago is our existing feeder. We have about aggregated 7 megawatt load. And we are building the microgrid in 2 phases. Now we're completing the first phase, which is part of 2 DOE projects, including the control capability, which is the real-time control of the microgrid controller. And the second is the smart inverter pieces. So we have already deployed the solar, which is third-party owned. We work with developer. It's a rooftop solar, which we already have about more than 500 kilowatt. We're still adding on to that. It's third-party owned. And they give us control, and we pay the incentive for that. The second part is we have energy storage, which is 500 kilowatt and 2 megawatt hours. We've already installed a commission as part of the microgrid. And the thing we're learning is first, all this requires smart inverter and be controlled by utility, although the third party owned is the solar and the utility owned as distribution assets is the battery. To generate the learnings and how this distributed energy resource can be utilized and battery storage can be utilized to integrate the solar better. And one core algorithm, I would say methodology we developed during the DOE project is called microgrid integrated solar storage technology, which we developed with our partners like national universities, and we are commercializing it with our vendors, and which going to put into our field next year. So which is generate those learnings, how to utilize the battery energy storage to integrate more solar by working both, I would say, grid connected mode and islanding mode. And as part of this, we went through the Illinois Commission approval last year, and we're going to generate learnings for 10 years on that. We developed a framework about holistic, like 50 metrics. We're going to collecting over the 10 years, and we're going to generate and every year file learnings about that, including the energy infrastructure impacts and benefits about that, and also the social impacts. So how this microgrid utilizing DER are going to provide resilient to the social impacts as well. So all these are pioneer work we're doing as well. And a couple of other projects we're doing energy storage is for using the capacity upgrade deferral for distribution grid. We have one project like 2 megawatt hour as Tesla pack, which is going to be commissioned soon, which is utilized to, I would say, defer the distribution substation upgrade. And this is also approved, this project, by the commissioner. We're going to generate learnings and as well. So those are the pioneer things. Like I say, we're already upfront. We're doing that together with developers and the government to generate all this. This is the pioneer work we're doing.
So this has been a great discussion so far, but I do want to make sure that we touch on integrated resource plans and the opportunity for storage to contribute value to IRPs. So I want to pose that to the whole panel. Maybe Julio, you can start and talk about the opportunities that storage can play in IRPs.
Well, in general, I would say that some of the key applications are related with capacity deferral, especially in assets that are overloaded. And when you think about capacity deferral for 1 or 2 years, and then you take the battery system and you relocate it to another optimal location, I think that's a very good case. The other one, kind of the classic, is when you pair it with solar to smooth down, to mitigate some of the potential impacts of solar in terms of variability, and also to firm up solar. That's kind of the classic example. And there are applications that are also related with volt-var control along distribution feeders, applications that are related with resiliency and reliability within the microgrid concept, or the virtual power plant concept as well. Actually, I think that's a nice opportunity that hasn't been explored that much here in the US. It has been more popular in Europe and also in Australia. But more recently, some developers here in the US have started to explore virtual power plants. So I think that there is potential. And as I said before, I think that both solar, storage, and behind-the-meter technologies too, demand response, et cetera, all of them have a place and a role in the grid of the future. Just to emphasize my point, I don't think that it's the answer for everything. So right now, once prices hit sweet spots, we'll see more and more applications. Well, of course, the traditional also application in electricity markets, energy arbitrage, that's another one. So certainly there is a role for storage, especially for batteries.
On the IRP, as a utility scale developer, I mean, that's what our community loves. Not so much for the wires related values, but because of the generation capacity value in a monopoly-owned IRP study. That's where the biggest paydays, the biggest projects have occurred by far. I have a couple I noted here. In Arizona, with First Solar, Arizona Public Service did 65 megawatt solar with a 50 megawatt, 2.5 hour battery. NextEra just announced a 700 megawatt project in Oklahoma with, I think, Western Farmers, G&T Co-op. The Skeleton Creek project, 250 megawatts wind, 250 solar, 200 megawatts. I mean, these are like single projects that dwarf entire year deployments of storage beforehand. And the biggest are in California, and there's a lot of mandates behind that rather than maybe pure play IRP. But, I think if APS announced that they really can't pencil a natural gas peaker anymore versus they said that a year ago. I think that was about 3 years too late. They should have said it about 3 years before that. No way should anybody in this room who's from Texas allow Excel in Amarillo or El Paso build another peaker. Solar and storage are going to be way cheaper. But the question is, they're trying to meet a generation capacity value, and are they really fairly valuing that value? Because it's not transparent. And when you look at transparent capacity markets, it's tough to pencil against.
Any other thoughts on IRPs?
Well, I think that, the IRP in Texas, it's problematic. I think that's the difficulty Dan's talking about. I think that, currently the way it's structured without a capacity market where it's just retail energy and market, I think financing those are going to be problematic. I think people are a little gun shy about these types of projects, and certainly from the legislative and regulatory, there's uncertainty. So I think people have backed away. At least here in Texas, I'm only speaking in Texas.
Well, there's been the retrofits. There's Eon 2-site, 10 megawatts each, or 9.9, just to have the easier interconnection. It's retrofit to wind farms. Vistra retrofitted, I think, with a similar size battery, although I think smaller hours, like a half-hour battery is more, or maybe I got that in reverse. I did. The Eon ones are half-hour batteries, which kind of indicates they're going for arbitrage. The Vistra batteries was more like a 4-hour battery, which I think it's better for demand charges, so I'm not exactly sure their angle there. But those are happening, and then we just heard this big announcement from GlidePath up in SPP in the Panhandle. They acquired like 8 different wind projects, and they're putting storage behind them. So I think that's also an arbitrage play. So the folks that say like the arbitrage isn't there yet, everybody's got their own model. Apparently, some people are putting money saying it is. Vistra and Eon are big companies. Maybe there's a little bit of a study dynamic to them. But the GlidePath one seems to be more pure play, money at risk, no capacity value, just trying to make money in the market.
I'm going to ask these gentlemen one more question, and then we'll get ready for the audience Q&A. Bill, you spoke briefly about ApolloWare. Can you talk a little bit more about how your organization is using the ApolloWare system to derive value?
Yes, I think that we started about 3 years ago, and again, we recognized that a lot of our customers who are putting in solar and storage from us and from others basically weren't getting the visibility and transparency and accuracy as far as what they were generating I think there was a lot of confusion between what's gross generation and net generation. I think most people think, oh, well, look how much I'm making. Yeah, but you're also using energy. A big disconnect there. And it was very difficult as a utility to explain that because we always come across like you're the bad guy, you're defensive, you're making it up, right? And so what we wanted to do is provide a solution that was transparent. So we partnered with Amazon Web Services and we've developed a cloud-based where the customer can log in and they can see the real-time their electrical load as well as what's generated net and gross. And over the last 3 years, what we've done is then started to develop various types of offerings, I would say, to our members as far as O&M and monitoring capabilities. So in other words, I'll let you know if your solar's producing what it should be producing. I'll let you know if there's equipment starting to fail. And so we've learned a lot about that. We've also been able to capture, more importantly, the true value of these devices during a 4CP event. So we're actually capturing the value that the grid gets from these devices. So it's a beginning. We started a real-time pricing program and then blew up our billing system. So we backed off of that for right now. Billing systems aren't necessarily designed for that type of activity. But what's amazing is in the short term, and I say 3 years short term, but we found a lot of interesting information about what's going on at the distribution home and behind the home, and it can be beneficial to provide that communication to our members. And so,
I'd like to chime in on this answer. I think that what you have described, I think that let's see, it's part of a more general concept. I would say the fact that utilities are still not ready, and methodologies in general, solutions in general, are not ready to deal with this new reality, right? So that goes back to the integration discussion that we had before. So I think that, let me give you an example, planning methodologies, right? We have been working on this topic, and right now we are working with a couple of utilities in this topic to review the T&D planning process and update it so you can consider all of these new variables, non-wire alternatives, distributed solar, distributed energy storage, value of the ER, value of the grid, and being able to update the processes, update tools as well, develop new tools. I think that we are not ready as an industry. We are not there yet. It's going to take us probably 5 years or so for us to modernize planning. I see in the last few years, I have seen a convergence, what I would call a convergence between transmission and distribution planning. They used to be done separately. They used to be separate activities. But with the proliferation of all of these new technologies, they are now, you have to do them jointly. And I don't think that we have neither the methodologies nor the tools to do it together. And then the other convergence, and you kind of alluded to that, is between planning and operations. Operations, real-time operations of distribution systems is becoming a reality. And again, that is new for utilities. So we have to start talking about operations planning, which is a new concept within distribution. So in summary, it is more than just interconnecting the devices, right? There is a lot of activities behind the interconnection. Interconnection studies are necessary and they provide a lot of value, but there is a lot more, especially once you get into high penetration levels of these technologies.
Thank you, guys. All right, so it's time for audience Q&A. Just a reminder, if you could raise your hand up so we have time to get that mic to you. But there's a gentleman right here.
My name is J.B. Garza, and I'm a real estate investment banker, so I work with developers finding and financing land and component solutions to their projects. One of them happens to be in Hawaii, and I know that was mentioned earlier. So we're looking to possibly do a solar farm out there, and I'm just seeing if anyone from the panel had experience out there.
I wish.
Playing on the beach.
Well, let's see, as part of Quanta technology, we have been helping Hawaiian Electric for, it's been probably 6 or 7 years with studies for integration of solar in both the distribution and transmission grid. solar and also energy storage.
Okay, thank you. I'll follow up with you later. Thank you.
Hey, this is Andy. I'm from Portland General. I think I traveled the furthest to come here. So it's been a nice conference. Thanks, everyone. This question's for Bill. You mentioned that you're finding a lot of learnings about inverters and how you're going on the roofs and learning real time, but you also mentioned how you're giving the demand charge savings back to the customer, and I just wanted if you could speak a little more on that.
Sure.
Is it a tariff thing? Is it an incentive? And do you specify how you're going to evaluate that up front with the customer, or how could you do that?
Right, good question. Right now, it's a voluntary kind of program. We spent probably the first 2 years just evaluating exactly what that contribution was based on the 4CP. And what we felt was, that there is a balance, just like setting up a demand response program where you're trying to reward people for their contribution to helping save everybody money. So what we do is we split the difference. So we basically, for example, my costs are about $4.92 kW. In Texas is a little weird because we don't have capacity charges, but the transmission component, basically it's about $5 a kW. So I'm looking at that kind of dollar amount, and then I look at what they're saving on those 4 CPs, and we split the difference. And so that's been received very positively, of course. But right now, everybody understands I only have 26 people doing that, okay? Because again, this is still a learning experience. But I think eventually I see where it will be a rate tariff kind of thing, where we will offer a program that's basically a tariff that says, if you want our solar storage, it's this much per month, and here you go.
And in theory, Austin Energy does too. They have a value of solar tariff, which is basically what Bill is offering under a different name. Although there's various components of that Austin Energy tariff that are a little more murkily created and less transparent as Bill's system.
Yeah, maybe I will add a little bit about Illinois perspective. We have passed the Future Energy Job Act in Illinois a couple of years ago. So one of this core component is incentive the renewable energy. So basically we have the tariff filed last year, which is provide $250 per kilowatt for right now is C&I, commercial and industrial solar up to, and a community solar up to 2 megawatt of $250 per kilowatt incentive for that. But in terms of that, you have to meet several requirements, including you have to be connected by smart inverter, which has certain requirements on each of the functions, and provided those controls set as required by utility. So last year we filed the smart inverter requirements, so including there are certain functions similar to Rule 21 as part of implementation, like similar to new 1547. So basically it's realizing the value if you can provide it by this, providing the control of the smart inverter, including like a volt var, right through, and communication pieces as well. So this is part of the realizing that value as well.
Just to add, in a study that we finished last year, one of these value of the ER studies that we finished, we estimated benefits for both, for the utility itself and also for customers. And it's part of this methodology when I mentioned before that you need to account for not only the technical but also the economic side of things. So in our methodology, we account for both, and you are able to estimate this is what should be accrued by customers.
We have time for maybe one more question. Is there one more question out? There we go.
My name is Jeff Xu, Liebtran. Quite quick question for Karen. When you mentioned 250 per kW, are you talking about the ADR, right? This is automatic demand response. You're talking about ADR.
No, it's for the incentive to your solar connections if you give several, including smart inverter requirements, and a couple of others as well.
Okay, so it's different from what the Bill mentioned about that it's split. So different, it's different program for sure.
Different.
Okay,
Different.
All right, that wraps it up for this panel. Thank you, gentlemen. It was a great discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.